they didn't have a provisional license for students. So there was no opportunity for students to be able to get experiences. So they did effectively pass an amendment to allow some of those people to gain some of those skills early on in their career. So we don't want to do any guinea pig testing here. We really want to be sure about the steps that we take moving forward. Are there any questions so far from the task force?
What was the cost of doing it in-house? You said that it was, the quote was $250,000.
For the diagnostic.
Just for the initial, but what was the total quote that they gave you if you to do it that way, and then, or how much it cost them, and also how much does it cost to license BCI or use that? Or BEI, excuse me.
So we used the same information that the BEI used. And we hired a contractor. I think that individual was from Northern Arizona University, from their language department. And so they did help us determine that from A to Z to establish an assessment was $250,000. We did have internal tech people that could be used, but DHS was not comfortable moving forward with creating our own test. Just to contract with BEI to be able to have the test housed at DHS in the state of Wisconsin is a $10,000 annual fee that would be paid every year.
This is Tom Harbison. Now, I understand the BEI has different levels, and so is 10,000 a license for one level of the test, or are you talking about for all 4 levels of the exam?
Great, yes. So the 10,000 would include all of the assessments within BEI. The written test, which is the test of English proficiency, the BEI Basic, the BEI Advanced, and the BEI Master. All of those elements would be included under that $10,000 contract. But the contractor with the Northern Arizona University, to be able to develop the own test, our own test, we'd have to take considerations for medical interpreting and mental health interpreting. We would have to develop all those things from scratch when BEI already has those things. Interpreter clarification. So BEI is already contracted with Northern Arizona University, and they developed. So if there are any developments or anything that's developed beyond what's already established, that would be included in the 10,000. The 10,000 does not include training for the raters. Our term previously was evaluators, but the BEI calls them raters. Logistic things like hotel, technical costs, things like that is not included in the $10,000. Presenters or trainers from Texas to come here, those costs, the travel costs, are not included. Now, once that initial upfront investment for getting the Texas people here and getting us established will be pretty significant. After that, and once things are up and running, it's kind of a 3-year, they come in and check to see how we're running things, and there are some costs associated with that, but it's much less than the initial startup costs. So this BEI clearly would satisfy our responsibility, which is required under the law that DHS provide an assessment.
And this is Tom Harbison. So imagine the training for the raters, of course. Now, how do we even have a good pool of raters in the state of Wisconsin? Who be the raters? And if not, how are you gonna fill the gap of raters and recruit them?
So if you want to become a rater for BEI, you first have to hold the BEI. If, for example, if I were to pass the BEI Basic, I could only rate the BEI Basic exams. So you have to hold the BEI credential for which you are rating. So if I have the BEI Advanced, then I can rate for the BEI. But I would not be able to rate for the BEI Basic or the BEI Master if I haven't taken those exams. And I'm only able to rate for one exam at a time. So if I'm rating for the advanced level, I can't also rate for the basic level or the master level. And my understanding, there are 4 people involved with the rating team. And it can include both deaf and hearing individuals.
Sorry to interrupt you, Amber, I just wanted to clarify. Again, this is Tom Harbison, so raters include both deaf and hearing individuals. If I were to rate the basic, you said that the individual must have taken the basic, but I'm assuming that you're talking about CDIs, because they would have had to have been able to take the test? Is that what you mean? Or are you saying that individuals who are deaf who do not have this credential are able to rate the BEI? Or is it so that they cannot?
And this is Amber, yeah, that's a very good question. It's not required to have a BEI, because BEI does not have a test offering currently for deaf interpreters. They're working on it, but currently the only offerings they have are for hearing interpreters. And because we haven't contracted with them formally, I don't have the details on that piece of where they are at the development of that test for deaf interpreters. Once we have the contract confirmed, then I'll get more information about that. Because we do have qualified people in the state of Wisconsin to become raters, so we want to make sure and include them. So with our proposal with DHS, we do have some funding that we'd like to earmark to pay for interpreters to become raters, deaf and hearing. Michigan does have the BEI. So, and Illinois as well. So we can pay for some of these interpreters to go get and take the exam in some of our neighboring states, and then be able to come back and get trained to become raters. But until we have those raters in place, the Texas raters would be willing to rate our test for us until we have a good pool of raters established here in our own state. So I can go ahead with the next part of our presentation.
This is Terry. I have a question. This is Terry. If we look at BEI as a state assessment, in replace of the national RID test, NAD rating, how does that work?
If you don't mind, I'm just going to ask you to hold that question for a few more slides, because I will be talking about that. And I have more information about
Yes.
why that can happen or can't happen.
And you can tell me on this one too if I need to hold. Have we proposed to DHS for the BEI, and what does the involvement look like in that process? Is there any community involvement?
Dan, yes, we've had the opportunity to involve community members. It's in process. The idea has been proposed. We are working on program content, and once all of that is through the approval process, then, I mean, we kind of have to, we don't want to put the cart in front of the horse. We want to make sure that our programs are solid, our proposal's good, because this is a new opportunity for everybody, so we want to make sure all of our ducks are in a row. So we have a better sense of what the BEI looks like and how it will work in the state before we really get everyone involved.
And just to tag on to that, as ODHH making this proposal, you know, I assume that things could be overlooked if you don't involve community stakeholders. So that's why I'm suggesting, you know, is prior to DHS approval, are you involving community input and opinion to make sure that we aren't missing something and they should be involved from the get-go? Even the Sign Language Interpreter Council, SLIC, would probably, are they involved at least in this process?
That's a great question. Just to clarify, the process itself will include community members. We are not going to exclude you by any means. It's just the proposed language. We will have the council, DSPS, the ideas, everything that it will look like. Our office legally is administering WIDA. It's a qualifying program, or quality assurance program. That's what we traditionally have done with the KQAS and then WIDA. So now, likewise, it will take place with the BEI. So our office will maintain its obligation to monitor and provide it. And that's why we're here today, just to explain and let you know what the proposal looks like, to get some feedback, and that will shape our continued movement on it. But this is just discussion over content and then the overall process. We are still going through the state process of contracting with Texas. And then once we do have that contract maintained, then we will be able to manipulate it to meet the needs specifically that we have here in the state, using your feedback in mind.
Okay,
That
this
answers
is Terry, thank you.
And this is Tom. I just had a question then. Do you have a deadline for this proposal process, you know, and when are you going to involve the deaf and interpreting community? So what is your timeline?
That's a great question. We will talk about that within the presentation, and we can add some elaboration on that as well. When everything is contracted, it's kind of unpredictable what the timeline may look like because we have to go off of Texas's schedule. So it's going to take some time to figure that out, and it's going to be flexible. This is just a rough draft that we're proposing to you tonight, or sharing with you. So the timeline does include community involvement, but our goal today is to start that process and get elaboration and clarification on WIDA, BEI Basic, and all the other exams, and then clarification as to how that transition will take place. But this is not going to happen overnight. It will take some time for the whole transition to work its way out. Okay, are we ready to go? Oh.
Just one more question. So it sounds like there's going to be an opportunity for community involvement in the process, and I'm very thankful to hear that, because when crafting policy, hearing directly from the stakeholders crafts better policy, obviously. My question is, I'm confused as to when in the process the community involvement takes place. Is this before the policy is crafted? Is this going to be afterwards so that it can be amended? And also, it sounds like that's part of what's happening here tonight, but are there going to be other opportunities for the community at large? And also, how is it going to be advertised and executed?
Mrs. Amber, I can respond to that question. For DHS policy, our agency does require that if we want to actively research, we must seek permission first and get all the necessary approvals. So we now have high-level thumbs up to begin more serious research on this. We now have permission to reach out to the community, to talk with DSPS. Up until now, we haven't had that go-ahead to do. We've had WIDA, and it's been community-owned. It's homegrown, the WIDA, and it's really difficult for us to think differently about our testing. Community has been very involved in developing the rubrics, developing, training our raters. And so now looking at kind of giving up some of that autonomy is a bit it's a little scary for us. Prior to 2009, we didn't have any legislative requirement for WIDA. It was really meant as a tool to help individuals gain feedback, get some mentoring, and know what they need to do to make some improvements in their skill, and then effectively pass the RID National Standard Test. And so we haven't gotten to the point where we have permission to really open all this up to the public and start gathering that feedback, because we didn't have that final approval. So we are at that point now where we can begin opening up, working with our state agency partners, working with community members and other stakeholders to gather some of that information. We do have a separate email system, inbox, that will begin communicating, gathering feedback for the BEI. We'll be developing an online newsletter to share information. We have already these things in place, these tools in place with DHS, so we thought, why not take advantage of these tools to have better communication with agency partners, community members, and other stakeholders. But we don't have any official policy decisions made yet. We are still at the idea level. This is just a proposal, and it might work, might not. We still don't know.
And again, just to clarify, so 2 quick questions. One, will those be in English and ASL? Okay. And 2, then, or sorry, were you saying yes or just waiting? Sorry. I misunderstood.
Yes.
Okay, and 2, are there going to be like listening sessions or town hall meetings? Is this just going to be through email? How's it going to look?
So if we go back to our ABCs, we will be, yes, starting with community. Yes, we will be doing all those things. It's step by step. So if we follow, we'll start with forums, listening sessions. We'll incorporate those things into our formal proposal, and they'll make adjustments as we gather that information. Texas staff will come and they will train us and raters. And so if we get to the point where this becomes something we actually have approval to move forward with, we will take all the steps necessary to make sure everyone has access to the information and can be part of the process. So based on the April meeting, I know there were a lot of questions regarding DSPS data. So I did reach out to them, and we gathered how many interpreters received the restricted license since 2011. So we have that to share up here on the screen today. So 2011 was when, that's the start of when the license is required to work as an interpreter. We had 73 initially. And we had a total of 53 WIDA assessments in 2011. In 2012, there were 24 new restricted licensed interpreters granted in 2012, and 41 WIDAs administered. In 2013, there were 21 new restricted license given. And if you remember, we already had, in 2011, 73 granted. So the 2013 numbers do not include the renewals, it's just new license given for restricted interpreters. We administered 34 WIDAs in 2013. Some for renewal and some for new. In 2014, there were 16 new restricted licenses given and 42 WIDAs administered. And if you remember, that was during the time that we implemented the new WIDA. And that was when the 6-year limit on the WIDA was implemented. In 2015, 16 new restricted licenses were given. And we had a record 66 WIDAs administered. And why that was is because people got initially licensed in 2011, they renewed in 2013, and then 2015 was the last time that they would be able to maintain a restricted license. So that's why we had that increase in WIDAs administered that year. So total restricted licenses given since the inception of the law is 150. 81 of those are inactive. Of those initial 150. September 1st, 2017, there are 28 restricted licensed interpreters that will not be able to renew at that level. 28. So timing is key for us right now to act with WIDA and have these conversations. And of course, now we also have RID who has the moratorium, so we feel an even increased responsibility to move forward with something.
Oh, I failed my job, Amber, I'm sorry. Should have forwarded it for you.
So that is the history of where we came from and why we're proposing the BEI now. Based on our research, based on our observations, we have noticed that BEI, and we feel confident that this is a valid test and something that would be appropriate to succeed WIDA. You remember that we borrowed our initial QA from Kansas, the KQAS. And we were able to buy, and then we asked them for updated materials. However, they were no longer using it for their licensing, so they were no longer developing it. They only accepted certification at the time of our request in January 1st of 2015. They were no longer offering the KQAS or updating any of their materials for our use. So it put us in an awkward spot, being that Kansas wasn't using their own exam and we were here in Wisconsin using it. Now they have renamed their program, which is called the Kansas Interpreting Diagnostic Assessment, KITA, and that is considered a non-certification exam. It's used for feedback, for purposes of professional development and mentoring only, which is what our WITA was initially established for.
Amber, can you make a point of clarification? Is that the 28 interpreters who will not be able to renew license, and where are they from in parts of the states? Are they more Milwaukee-based? Because I just want to, she just mentioned the 28 interpreters that will not be able to renew their license as of next year. Does that impact which areas of the state? Is it going to be majority Milwaukee, or if you could identify maybe where most of those individuals are from?
I don't have that information with me currently, but I would be able to email you the geographical locations as soon as I get back to my office.
And this is Dan, we'll take note of that and try and get that information.
Yeah, I'll try to get that out to you on Monday.
Thank you.
As soon as I can.
This is, one second. So they cannot get a license, is what you're saying?
When the Wisconsin Act 360 was written, it said the restricted license in the initial application are allowed 2 renewals.
So they can have their initial license, and then they can renew 2 more times. And the law also says that it has to be, and it follows the other professions under DSPS who have licenses that have to be renewed on odd years. So when our law became published, when it actually passed, it went into effect 6 months later. So it was May 2010 when interpreters had to have their first license. So DSPS granted a extension, a grace period of type to December 31st of 2010. Because individuals were required to have that for working as an interpreter, they made that